In 1922, excavators at Mohenjo-daro uncovered a grid of streets laid out with precision that rivaled Roman engineering, drainage systems running beneath nearly every building, and standardized fired bricks used across an entire city. The problem wasn't that the city existed. The problem was that it flourished around 2500 BCE, 1,000 years before anyone thought urban planning at this scale was possible in South Asia, and then vanished so completely that no historical record mentioned its name. The Indus Valley Civilization had been theorized based on scattered artifacts, but Mohenjo-daro revealed something archaeology wasn't prepared for: a Bronze Age metropolis housing an estimated 40,000 people, built without monumental temples, royal palaces, or the centralized authority structures that defined every other early civilization. The city had infrastructure, it had wealth, it had trade networks stretching to Mesopotamia. What it didn't have was the political architecture anyone recognized. The first challenge was chronology. Excavators initially struggled to place Mohenjo-daro in the existing timeline because its material culture didn't match contemporary Egypt or Mesopotamia. Pottery styles, tool types, and construction methods formed a distinct technological tradition. Stratigraphic analysis eventually established that the city reached its peak during the mature Harappan period, roughly 2500 to 1900 BCE, making it older than many Greek city-states and contemporary with the Old Kingdom of Egypt. The uniformity of construction across multiple building phases suggested not gradual organic growth, but planned expansion executed over centuries. Building materials followed exacting standards. The bricks measured in consistent ratios across the entire site, indicating quality control mechanisms that persisted through generations of construction. No other Bronze Age civilization maintained this level of standardization without leaving administrative records to explain how it was enforced. The grid itself contradicted assumptions about how early cities developed. Streets ran in cardinal directions, dividing the city into regular blocks. Major avenues were wide enough for carts to pass in both directions. Side lanes connected to covered drains built into the foundations, carrying waste away from residential areas. Every house had access to water through wells or public facilities, and many featured private bathing platforms with drainage that fed into the municipal system. This wasn't the work of a single visionary ruler. The infrastructure was maintained and expanded across multiple generations, implying a bureaucratic capacity that left no written records we can read. The drainage network alone required coordinated maintenance, periodic cleaning, and adherence to construction standards that prevented individual homeowners from disrupting the system. Someone was enforcing these rules, but the enforcement mechanism left no archaeological signature. The script is the second obstacle. Archaeologists have recovered over 4,000 inscribed objects from Indus Valley sites, mostly seals and tablets bearing short sequences of symbols. The longest inscription contains fewer than 30 characters. Despite a century of attempts, the Indus script remains undeciphered. Scholars can't agree whether the symbols represent a full writing system, a proto-writing mnemonic, or something else entirely. Without readable texts, we have no king lists, no administrative records, no foundation myths, and no explanation for how a city this size resolved disputes, organized labor, or collected resources. The brevity of the inscriptions suggests they may have been labels or identifiers rather than narrative texts, but even that interpretation remains contested. Some researchers argue the symbols aren't writing at all, but rather a system of non-linguistic signs used for ritual or economic purposes. The seals themselves reveal a trading civilization. Indus seals have been found in Mesopotamian cities, particularly Ur, indicating long-distance commerce during the 3rd millennium BCE. The seals depict animals, particularly a bull with a single horn that appears nowhere in nature, and short inscriptions that likely identified merchants or goods. Standardized weights discovered across Indus sites follow a precise binary system, confirming regulated trade. Yet there's no evidence of a palace economy, no centralized grain storage on the scale of Egypt or Mesopotamia, and no clear temples where redistribution might have occurred. The economic system functioned, but its mechanism remains invisible. Trade goods moved thousands of kilometers. Quality standards were maintained. Weights were calibrated to a common system. All of this happened without the institutional infrastructure that archaeologists use to reconstruct economic organization in other ancient societies. Architecture tells a different story than monumental propaganda. While Mohenjo-daro had large public structures, including a building known as the Great Bath with sophisticated waterproofing, it lacked the royal tombs, victory monuments, and dedicatory inscriptions that allow archaeologists to reconstruct political hierarchies elsewhere. Houses varied in size, suggesting economic stratification, but even the largest residences used the same standardized bricks and followed the same urban plan as smaller homes. The uniformity extended across hundreds of kilometers. Other major Indus cities like Harappa and Dholavira followed similar layouts with local variations, implying either shared cultural norms or some form of coordinating authority that left no identifiable trace. The consistency suggests intentional planning rather than independent parallel development. But planning requires planners, and those planners left no monuments to themselves. The citadel mound presented another puzzle. Elevated above the lower city, it contained the Great Bath and several large structures that excavators initially interpreted as granaries. Later analysis showed these buildings likely served other functions, possibly administrative or ritual, but without texts, their purpose remains speculative. What's clear is that the citadel wasn't a fortress. Mohenjo-daro had no defensive walls, no weapon caches, and no evidence of a standing military. The city thrived for centuries in the absence of the coercive architecture that defined other Bronze Age states. This presents a fundamental problem for models of early urbanism that assume cities require military force to maintain internal order and defend against external threats. Mohenjo-daro suggests alternative organizational possibilities that we cannot yet reconstruct. Then it ended. Around 1900 BCE, Mohenjo-daro and other major Indus cities began to decline. By 1700 BCE, they were abandoned. Early theories proposed a sudden catastrophe, invasion, earthquake, or catastrophic flooding. Archaeological evidence doesn't support any of these scenarios. There are no mass graves, no destruction layers, no signs of violence. Instead, the material record shows gradual depopulation. Construction quality declined in later phases. Streets went unrepaired. The drainage system fell into disrepair. People left, but they left slowly, over multiple generations, in a process that looks more like demographic transition than disaster response. Current research points to environmental stress. Paleoclimatic data indicates shifts in monsoon patterns around 2000 BCE, potentially reducing water availability for agriculture. The Ghaggar-Hakra river system, which supported settlements in the eastern Indus region, may have dried up or changed course. Without centralized grain storage or the bureaucratic apparatus visible in Mesopotamia, Indus cities may have lacked the resilience to survive prolonged drought. Trade networks contracted. Urban populations dispersed into smaller villages. The script, if it was ever widely used, disappeared. Within a few generations, knowledge of the cities faded so completely that later South Asian civilizations built their own histories without reference to the Indus Valley tradition. The organizational knowledge that had maintained urban life for 600 years was lost, not destroyed in a single event, but dissipated as populations scattered and institutional memory dissolved. Mohenjo-daro today faces a different kind of disappearance. The site sits in Pakistan's Sindh province, where groundwater salinity and seasonal flooding cause ongoing deterioration. Excavated brick structures erode faster than they can be conserved. UNESCO designated Mohenjo-daro a World Heritage Site in 1980, the first in South Asia, but protective measures have been inconsistent. Restoration efforts in the 1980s used inappropriate materials that accelerated decay. Much of the city remains unexcavated, preserved underground but vulnerable to water table changes and agricultural expansion in surrounding areas. The irony is that excavation, intended to reveal the city, exposes fragile materials to destructive processes that threaten to erase what remains. The paradox is this: Mohenjo-daro demonstrates that urban civilization can arise without kings, without temples, without written propaganda, and without military conquest. It built infrastructure that wouldn't be matched in the region for 2,000 years, maintained trade across vast distances, and sustained a population larger than most Bronze Age cities. It did all of this while leaving almost no trace of the political mechanisms that made it possible. We can map the drains, measure the bricks, trace the trade goods, and analyze the construction phases. What we cannot do is read the words, name the rulers if there were any, or explain how 40,000 people organized themselves without the institutional signatures every other early civilization left behind. The city is there. The system that built it remains invisible, a functional urban society that succeeded by methods we have not yet learned to recognize in the archaeological record. Visual reconstructions are illustrative. Facts and interpretations are based on the sources listed in the description.